Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is Rock and Roll Spot coming at you. Today, we've got something a little different than normal. A few days ago, I was perusing my Facebook, as I want to do when I'm bored, and I came upon an article from comicbookresources.com. It's a web. For those unfamiliar, comicbookresources.com is a website that basically just posts articles concerning that concern comic books, no matter how, even if it's very barely concerning a comic book. Anyway, a lot of their articles are generally referred to as listicles, or articles in list format. And this one caught my eye. It was entitled 20 X-Men Comics Better Than the Dark Phoenix Saga. Now, first, for those unaware, this is the Dark Phoenix Saga. I bought the omnibus a few weeks ago, and it's beautiful. Anyway, so, the Dark Phoenix Saga concerns Jean Grey honestly being replaced by a cosmic entity known as the Phoenix Force, and eventually having a split personality created that it is a darker version of said cosmic entity, called the dark side of said cosmic entity, and is referred to as Dark Phoenix. Dark Phoenix does, amongst other things, consumes an entire solar system in the Shi'ar Empire. So, and it is also considered to be one of, if not the best X-Men story of all time. So let's take a look at these 20 stories that this comic book resource contributor considers better than the Dark Phoenix Saga. Alright, first off, wait. Oh, now that makes so much more sense. Well, we're just going to go in the order that they are on here. Apparently somebody kind of goofed and a code monkey goofed, and it started at 19, though there are 20 on here. So we start off with Fatal Attractions. Okay, Fatal Attractions is a 6-part storyline that was released to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the X-Men. It ran through all 6 X-Men books at the time, with the exception. It ran through all of the X-Men books at the time, with the exception of Cable's just begun solo ongoing series. Okay. The real important parts of the story are parts 3, 4, and 5. 6 is moderately important, but 2, 1, not really. So, we start off in X Factor 92, what's important for the story is the introduction of the character Exodus, who is in this point in time, Magneto's new right-hand man. Now, the story X Factor 92 sets up a story that wouldn't come to fruition for another 3 to 4 years. As we get a look at Project Wide Awake, and which was a part of Operation Zero Tolerance, which was the aftermath of Onslaught, which is actually related to Fatal Attractions. So, anyways, X-Force 25. Our major plot points. For Fatal Attractions itself, because Magneto makes a new orbital base out of the remaining orbiting portion of Cable's space station, Greymalkin. Calls it Avalon. There are other important plot points, like Cable returns to X-Force. That's really it in the way of important plot points there. Uncanny X-Men number 304. This is probably one of the best issues of the entire story. The funeral of Ileana Rasputin. All the X-Men are present. Everyone. All the teams. It even looks like ones who are kind of, yeah, we're X-Men, but we're only X-Men when they say, hey, can you help us? Or when we show up on their doorstep, say, hey, can you guys help? Everyone's there for the funeral of Colossus's sister. And this has a big plot point for the story as Colossus leaves the X-Men and joins Magneto's acolytes. Also, Magneto disciplines one of his acolytes for his actions earlier in the story. By discipline, I mean kills. It also has one of my favorite splash pages ever, and probably my favorite Bishop picture. So, when Magneto arrives at the funeral to basically say, hey, you guys can all come and join me on Avalon, within reason, and to pay his respects to Ileana, as she was a student under his care for a brief period. He freezes the X-Men in place with his powers, and somehow Bishop, because of Magneto doing this, Bishop is absorbing energy from it as his powers do. Which means he's building up energy. Because that's what he does. And then he lets loose, and when you get this shot of him standing over Magneto with energy beams coming out of each fingertip, while all the X-Men that have energy powers just pour their powers into Bishop. It is so cool. John Romita Jr.'s artwork on that was, I want a poster of that without the dialogue. Next up, we've got X-Men 25. This was another big point in the story. The government puts up. So the major plot point is that Wolverine loses his adamantium as Magneto pulls it out of his body through his pores. But there's a reason for that. There's a reason that comes to pass. It's not just, he says, you know what, I'm doing that. No. The X-Men, Magneto hits the planet with an EMP after the government puts up supposed to be a force field that will make it so that he can't use his powers on Earth. But like I said, Magneto hits the planet with an electromagnetic pulse. The X-Men, because they have Shi'ar technology in the mansion, are just like, someone turn everything back on again. So they turn everything back on, go to Avalon, a handful of them. Colossus even kind of helps out. This was the other major plot point for this, is that Xavier wipes Magneto's mind after Magneto does what he does to Wolverine. But yeah, they fight. Wolverine cuts up Magneto for the umpteenth time, and Magneto's like, you know what? I'm just sick of this shit. and does that. And as the adamantium is leaching its way out of, coming out of Wolverine's body, like I said, through his pores, Xavier's just like, no, we done. We're done with this, and wipes Magneto's mind. What it turns out he would do is he takes Magneto's consciousness into his own, and the two consciousnesses had a psychic baby called Onslaught. No, really, that's what happened. But yeah, that's not that. What's important is the wiping of Magneto's mind and Wolverine having his adamantium sucked out through his pores. Next, we got Wolverine 75, where we discover that, Wolverine's claws are bone. And Wolverine, noting the fact that he overworked his healing factor after in surviving having the adamantium sucked out of his body, he leaves the X-Men because, well, he's not much. He decides to go, get his affairs in order. And he leaves the X-Men on his own, leaving his cowboy hat to Jubilee, who before that was basically his sidekick. Next up, you had Excalibur. Oh God, what issue number was that? I want to say it was in the early 70s, but yeah, I just realized I don't remember what that. Honestly, Fatal Attractions is not a bad story. It's just not a great story. And it's not on par with Dark Phoenix Saga. I hate to. Okay. Excalibur number 71. Okay, there we go. Yeah, Excalibur 71. Excalibur tries to convince Colossus to come back by manipulating him by a kitty pride. It's kind of one of the low moments for the X-Men. It's really not. After the destruction of Avalon, I think Colossus went into state. Was with X-Factor for a while. But anyway, yeah, he was with Excalibur for a little while. So anyways, next on their list, Messiah Complex. So Messiah Complex was the first of three stories to deal with the Mutant Messiah. It's also the first of three crossovers that were the major X-Men crossovers for in the aftermath of House of M. So, first off, House of M. Let's talk about that for a moment. Just a moment. At the end of House of M, Scarlet Witch, right here, says no more mutants, and the world goes white. Everyone wakes up, and the mutant population has been cut from multiple millions to 198. Some people even died in the middle of using their powers. Various stories were shown. There was a story with Magma, her and this guy that she met who had similar powers, with them surfing in a volcano, and then he loses his powers and sinks into the lava. Just Sabretooth was in the middle of some heist, and he had a partner who had force field powers. It was like, and suddenly, while bullets were bouncing off the force field, they started to go through his partner. But yeah, and so then Beast went and dug up the bodies of dead mutants, and noticed that some of them, their X gene was gone, which that shouldn't be the case, because they are mutants. They were mutants, you know. And so, Messiah Complex begins with the birth of a baby in Alaska. And the baby's birth fries Cerebro, and so the X-Men aren't really able to go after it, but other groups are, namely the Marauders and the Church of Humanity's Purifiers, and the two groups lay waste to the town. Also, the weapon facilities creation Predator X was also present during all this. Anyways, so turns out that the baby was taken by Cable. Also, another plot point, Forge notes that, oh, hey, apparently Forge has a machine that monitors alternate realities. Beforehand, there was no mutant activity in these alternate realities. Suddenly, though, two of them had mutant activity. And so two Madrox dupes go to check them out. One of them, it turns out, is the alternate reality that leads to, or that Bishop is native to. And Layla Miller goes with him into that one. Anyway, the Office of National Emergency Sentinel mechs go kind of nuts, smash up the mansion. When it's discovered that Cable has the baby, Cyclops creates a Black Ops X-Men team. X-Force. His own X-Force team. Funny, his son created an X-Force team years beforehand. Anyway, this team consisting of Wolverine, Warpath, Hepzibah, X-23, Caliban, some former members of X-Force, and some trackers. And they go after him. They fight Purifiers, they fight the Marauders, and then it turns out that Bishop has betrayed the X-Men, and he, in fact, shoots Xavier in the head. And Cable ends up taking the baby into the future to raise her. Mutant would go on to be named Hope. Well, Hope Summers, in fact. And yeah. So, it's not a bad story, it's just not a great story. It led to a major status quo change with the X-Men. The with the team moving to San Francisco. It also had the beginning of the mutant hit squad, the X-Men hit squad version of X-Force. What else? What else? What else? I mean, it did have some major plot points for overall, but it just, and it's not a bad story, especially considering the fact that it's, you know, less, it's about a decade or so old. It's still pretty damn good, but it's not great. And the only reason it'll probably stand up is because of its importance in the overall mythos. Next on the list, we have the Phalanx Covenant. Why anybody would think the Phalanx Covenant is better than the Dark Phoenix Saga is beyond me. The Phalanx Covenant is 3 separate but interconnected crossovers wherein various X-Men teams fight the intergalactic techno-organic Phalanx, who are in fact who are actually somewhat related to former New Mutants member Warlock, but not the point. So first off, we've got Generation Next. Generation Next is probably the most important of the 3 crossovers, because this will lead directly into the beginning of the comic Generation X, which was supposed to be a new version of the New Mutants. And so Generation Next, introduced some of the characters who would end up being team members for Generation X, including Sync, Skin. I think really those. And M. Now, an inadvertent but introduction was also made to a character that would end up being much more prominent than probably anyone realized, in the form of Blink. However, Blink is much more the concept than the character, because the Blink that is actually well known and popular is not the Earth 616, which is the designation for the primary Earth in Marvel Comics. Blink, but rather a different Blink from a different reality, which we'll get to later. Anyway, then you've got let's see, there was the Wolverine and Cable 2-parter, which had Wolverine, Cable, Cyclops, and Jean Grey fighting the Phalanx on Muir Island. And then there was the 3-parter with X-Factor, Excalibur, and X-Force, which had the 3 teams in Europe. And went into the origin of the character Douglock and his relation to the Phalanx. Like I said, the only one that's really important was Generation Next, and that focuses on Banshee, Emma Frost, Jubilee, and Sabretooth fighting the Phalanx and trying to save the next generation of mutants from the Phalanx. Eventually, like I said, you know, by and large they do. Blink sacrifices herself. It's actually rather sad. Oh. Anyway, next on the list. Second Coming. So I mentioned earlier that Messiah Complex was the first of 3 crossovers involving the Mutant Messiah, as well as the first of 3 major X-Men crossovers after House of M. Second Coming is the third of those. Is the third in both of those. And both Messiah War and Necrosha X lead into it. Though Messiah War much more so than Necrosha. So, Second Coming has Cable return to the present with a teenage Hope. Only he returns to the mansion, which is in ruins, and has to then make his way across country with Smiley, all manner of anti-mutant soldiers on his ass. The X-Men Alpha team meets up with him. We also get the revelation to some members of the X-Men that, oh, Cyclops has a very deadly hit squad that includes Wolverine and X-23. And they are literally killing people. And they're just like, yeah, okay, that guy's dead. He's not a problem anymore. That's wrong. That's not how we do. It also featured the death of Nightcrawler, which was moving. And God, and his funeral is when Wolverine straight calls out Hope during his eulogy for Nightcrawler, saying that she'd damn well better be worth it. Oh, yeah. Anyways, it also features the character return. It's got Bastion as a major villain. There's also a group of side stories that are related but not. There's an X Factor story with X Factor Investigations and the the MRD. There's the time travel story with X Club. The science, the basically X-Men, the X-Men Science Division. But yeah. At the end, when Hope is saved and the bad guys are beaten, mutant signatures start to pop up, according to Cerebra. So it seemed that was kind of the beginning of, hey, we're gonna do the right thing. We're gonna bring back. The mutants are not in as much danger as they were before. Yay! But they're still not at their previous numbers. Again, it's a good story. It really is. It's just not on par. It is seriously not on par with Dark Phoenix. It's a good read, and it's going to stand up. And just like Messiah Complex, it's going to stand the test of time because of its importance in the overall mythos. But other than that, yeah. The Proteus Saga. Now, this one has a chance. So, okay. Chris Claremont and John Byrne, who were the writer-artist duo on Dark Phoenix, also did this way back in the day. So, Proteus is the son of Moira McTaggart, a longtime ally of the X-Men. He has these insane reality warping powers, and she kept him locked up. And was more than willing to kill her son, so the world wouldn't have to deal with him. What he's able to do, he breaks Wolverine, and it's one of those times when the X-Men had to kill. and they weren't happy about having. It was like, oh god, Proteus has since returned various times. Most recently, during the first dozen issues of the recently capped off Astonishing X-Men run. All right. Next up, the Brood Saga. The X-Men fight xenomorphs. Seriously, that's what the Brood basically. The Brood are what are Marvel's version of the xenomorph. And okay. No, okay. Mention, there's some great character work like Nightcrawler's, going into Nightcrawler's faith, and Kitty trying to handle the idea of dying young, because it looks like they're going to die. Carol Danvers also gets her gets some spotlight, and becomes the Brood end up experimenting upon her, and she becomes the character Binary. Yeah, again, it's got some really good points, and it's got some really good parts, and it stands up because of the Brood, largely. The Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix. Now, this is two different miniseries. The first. Has them going to the future, or on their honeymoon. Their minds get pulled from the present to the future, and in the future, the far off future, where they end up raising Cable for a decade. They spend a decade in the future, and they're sent right back to where they left. The next story would have them sent to the past, where we would learn the origin of Mr. Sinister. And so it fleshes out Cable's backstory. It definitively answered the question of who was the original between Cable and Strife. And it gave us the origin of Mr. Sinister. All very important things, but they're important for some characters, not everyone. So, and that's actually going to smack right in the face of why Dark Phoenix is so important, because what's so important about it is largely, what happens to Jean, but it's also the effects that what happened to Jean has on the X-Men. This is just, that we see the origin of a longtime villain. We basically find out, oh, this is what Cable went through growing up. Okay. Next up, we've got Broodfall, which has a brood egg ending up on Earth, and a mutant becoming infected by it. And by the time the X-Men get to him, this guy's already infected other mutants. So we've now got we've basically got xenomorphs with superpowers. That's not a good thing. Let's just go ahead and say that. It's just, one, it comes off as being derivative of the initial Brood story. And two, it's just like, it's kind of, okay, so we want to do another Brood story. What can we do what else can we do? Well, how about we have the Brood actually, with superpowers from mutants? Ooh, that's an idea. Okay, let's do that. But anyway, I'm just not seeing it. Mutant Genesis. Okay, so this is the first 3 issues of X-Men from 1991. And it's also the last arc that Claremont wrote in his long time writing X-Men. Basically, you've got the introduction of the Acolytes, who would last for a good 2 or 3 years. Some of the characters have stuck around, but yeah, they've basically been kind of, pulled into either the Marauders or the Brotherhood. You've got... You don't even have the X-Men being split up into 2 different strike teams. That actually didn't occur until X-Men number 4. But about half the team gets ends up fighting alongside Magneto and the Acolytes, and yeah. And you have the supposed death of Magneto, which lasted for 2 years. Next up, we've got the Asgard Saga, which kind of 2 big events. It says on the entry here, 2 big events in one. Beginning with the team-up miniseries of the X-Men and Alpha Flight. Cyclops and some of the others are given magical abilities that they use to help the world. Allows Rogue gets to touch people. Puck becomes full size. Cyclops doesn't need his visor. But the turn of of course, the benefactor who gives them these gifts is none other than Loki. Yep, everyone's favorite trickster god. And yeah, there ends up being a fight between the 2 teams, but then they said, you know what, whoa, let's just fight Loki. And he's like, hey, okay, I'm good. I'm good. Next, there's some more stories where he gets his revenge, kidnaps the Doomings, and they can call him to Asgard. This sets up something that was actually just recently capped off with Storm having an Asgardian hammer of her own. And that's a story, plot point which has finally come to full fruit, its full ending in the last few issues of X-Men Gold. I'm pretty sure the point where Mirage of the New Mutants became a Valkyrie. The X-Men fighting Alpha Flight was kind of the X-Men teaming up and or fighting Alpha Flight was kind of a common thing in the 80s. So yeah, okay, so this time Loki got involved. Whoopity-doo. Next on the list, we've got X-Men First Class, which is a miniseries, which basically had it kind of has here's what happened kind of between stories back with the first few issues of X-Men, which okay, that's kind of neat. I'd rather see something along the lines of Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes for that time period, because a more modernized take on those stories that doesn't seem so goofy. Yeah, it's just kind of here's some additional stories of the young X-Men. It's cool. I mean, it's cool, especially getting to see stuff with the X-Men, the original 5 X-Men as teenagers with lives. But I honestly kind of think that all new X-Men and X-Men Blue kind of handled that a bit better. Next up, we've got Examinations. Okay, I'm going to put this out there. This is one of the best single issues of any comic series. This is X Factor number 87. It was the first issue that now former editor-in-chief Joe Quesada did the pencil work for on X Factor. But yeah, this would be the first issue. This was the first issue of the series after the crossover Executioner's Song. And it has the team speaking to a figure who's largely in the shadows. We don't see him until the very end, and it's got an excellent explanation as to why Quicksilver is such a dick. And that's honestly because it makes perfect sense when you really stop and think about it. The way to him, the world moves at a snail's pace, and he goes through this whole situation, this whole thing to the therapist. You know, imagine being in line at McDonald's, and you know the person in front of you. You know, it's this whole situation. You're like, and you realize, and that's every interaction with a human being, with a person who is not super fast, to Quicksilver. And at the end of the issue, we discover that this shadowy person they've been talking to this whole time is in fact longtime Hulk ally, Doc, and psychologist Doc Samson. But yeah, it's so great. It goes into, it also goes into things like how Polaris is coping with her time possessed by the psychic entity Malice. How Wolfsbane is dealing with the fact that Wolfsbane and her obsession with Havoc because of what occurred in the crossover Extinction Agenda, and it's one of the greatest single issues of any comic series. But yeah, it's but yeah, it really is a great issue. I would probably put, when it comes to X-Men stories, I would probably rank that at least in the top 10. Next up, we've got Gifted. Now, Gifted is the first arc of Joss Whedon's run on Astonishing X-Men way back in 2004. It's a really solid arc. The biggest problem with it is the fact that it went from being a monthly, because I don't know whose fault it is, but somewhere along the line it went from being monthly to bi-monthly to whenever the hell we can get an issue out. And so they ended up having to force in when it started, they could have easily have been most of the way through when M-Day happened. Instead, we got through one storyline, and then I think about early on in the second one, like, oh, by the way, M-Day happened. But we were introduced to Order the Break World, as well as Nick Fury's basically the cosmic version of Nick Fury in the form of Abigail Brand, director of Sword. She's super cool, and yeah, and it sets up kind of that the lineup as being the A team, and it brought back Colossus. You've got a great bit with Cyclops and Nick Fury discussing things in the aftermath of the end of Grant Morrison's run on New X-Men. You've also got this great scene with the X-Men fighting a giant monster in New York, and the Fantastic Four showing up as well, and the banter between the two teams, and between just between the members of the Fantastic Four themselves, it's so spot on. It's perfect. But as an individual story, the biggest problem with it also introduces the plot point of the mutant cure, which would be utilized in X-Men 3, along with Dark Phoenix. But the problem is that it is very clearly the first part of a larger story. And that really shows it. And I can't really call it a better story than this because, like I said, it's part of a story. Examinations is its own issue. One issue, you're done with the story. Gifted is very much so the beginning of something. All right, next up we got E is for Extinction, which was the beginning, which was one of the Grant Morrison Frank Quietly stories. In fact, I think it's the beginning of their run on New X-Men. It's a good story. My biggest problem with it is the artwork more than anything, as it's I don't like Frank Quietly's artwork. Grant Morrison's writing, I tend to like it. There are times when I really want to tell him to, stop writing comic books while he's stoned, but more often than not, I'm fine with his stuff. When he has an interesting story idea, it usually works for me. Well, by interesting, I tend to mean a non-traditional story idea. But E's for Extinction is not bad. Again, it's also very clearly the beginning of something bigger, which it was. And it's got plot points that have sunk in and been referenced over and over again since then, namely the destruction of Genosha, which most recently was referenced in X-Men Red, as the remains of Genosha is where Cassandra Nova, who in fact engineered the destruction of Genosha, was working from. But like I said, it's a good story. It's just, one, it's the beginning of something bigger, and two, it's not great, but it is really good. All right, next up we got Mutant Massacre, which was one of the biggest X-Men stories for a while. Basically, a group of mutants called the Marauders invade the Morlock tunnels under New York and start killing the Morlocks. There's, I think it was this was actually I think before Mutant Massacre there was a scene with some of them making an attempt on or fighting the X-Men, and team member Scalp Hunter introducing themselves, saying, we're the Morlocks. We kill mutants. Who's next?" But this had one of the first fights between Wolverine and Sabretooth. It had Angel's wings getting damaged to the point where they were amputated and then remade by Apocalypse. Well, they weren't amputated by Apocalypse, but yeah, they were remade by Apocalypse. So I mean, it had major consequences. The big thing was supposed to be that it killed off the Morlocks. Now the thing about that though is there must have been like one Morlock for every, I don't know, one resident of New York topside. With all the Morlocks that keep showing up that survived, it's like, you know, how, the whole idea was that you guys were driven, you know, there was supposed to only have been a handful of you left, but we've had so many pop up since then that, like I said, survived, or at least survived to that point, the point they popped up. But it's hard to take that part seriously. And the reason why they were, the reason for it is something we'll get to later. But yeah, it's, the Marauders would then later show up in Inferno, and especially when it was revealed that they were working for Mr. Sinister. Anyways, next up we got the Wolverine miniseries by Chris Claremont and Frank Miller. I love this book. It's a really good Wolverine story. As an X-Men story, it's, if we're going to count, you know, this doesn't have the same feel that X-Men stories have, and that's a detriment to it. It is like I said, it's a great Wolverine story. It's probably one of the best Wolverine stories. Yeah, easily top 10. But like I said, it's not. Yeah. And it does have some major points for Wolverine, but not for anyone else. Anyways, next up we've got From the Ashes. From the Ashes is basically a sequel to Dark Phoenix. The biggest thing is that Cyclops meets Madeline Pryor, who, holy shit, looks just like Jean Grey. And the two eventually get married. By eventually, I mean, like, you know, by the end of the storyline. Of course, Madeline Pryor would be revealed eventually to be a clone of Jean Grey, and the whole plan being that she would marry Scott Summers and get knocked up by him, and their child, and Mr. Sinister, who created her, would then take the child and use that as a weapon against Apocalypse. Instead, that child would grow up to be Cable. Alright, next up, Age of Apocalypse. Okay, this one is easily one of the best, and it's kind of unfair to put this in there because it's like 7 different stories that are connected, but at the same time, they're separate. And in fact, most of them read just fine, but as standalone stories. Factor X, okay, that one reads pretty well, but at the same time, this also is an excellent way of looking at it, having continuity within a family of comic books. One example, so in Weapon X, which was the Wolverine, the 4-issue version of Wolverine for this, it starts off Wolverine and Jean Grey working for the Human High Council in England and doing what they can to save humans from the forces of apocalypse. However, after the second issue, at the end of the second issue, Jean goes back to America and infiltrates. The idea being to infiltrate the pens to help get people out of there. And of course, in Factor X number 3, Cyclops and her are reunited, which leads to Cyclops openly betraying Apocalypse, as opposed to just breaking people out secretly. But yeah, it really is a great story. It comes out of the concept of Xavier dying 20 years before he could found the X-Men, and Magneto saying, "Hey, you died saving my life, so I am going to honor your dream of humans and mutants living side by side in harmony." We were just arguing about how I don't think it's possible. I'm going to try to make that happen. And so Magneto forms the X-Men. Apocalypse comes to power. Heroes are villains. Villains are heroes. I mean, hell, like I said, Cyclops and Havoc are not horsemen of Apocalypse, but they work with Apocalypse. The Beast works with Apocalypse. Juggernaut is a monk in the Savage Land. While not entirely a hero, Mystique is not working for Apocalypse. And that was also kind of, she's also much closer to her son, Nightcrawler. We also just got different versions of characters. For example, Dead Man Wade, which was their take on Deadpool. He's not wisecracking all the time. He's in constant pain, and when he gets his head teleported off, it's not. I don't think he doesn't. He's not glad. I'm sure he wasn't glad about it. He probably was like, "Oh, I'm dead. I'm like, bam! Looks like I'm dying now." But yeah, I mean, like I said, the characters are done differently. Sabretooth as a member of the X-Men and a good guy, not just, well, we're going to have you as an X-Men but only if you don't kill people. Nope. He's legit a good guy. Also, it brought back Blink from the Generation Next portion of the Phalanx Covenant, and fleshed out her character. And so, while the character was already fairly popular after Generation Next, that skyrocketed her popularity, her cult popularity. And so, when a comic was started with characters from alternate realities in the Marvel universe banding together, she was right there from the get go. But yeah, like I said, that's Age of Apocalypse probably comes pretty close to being better, or at least as good, maybe better. I can at least I can see arguments for it being better, and it's also it's the aftermath and repercussions are still being felt to this day, and not just because because of a major it's other things. It's characters. For example, Sugar Man, who was killed in the end of the recent Uncanny X-Men #1. He originated in the Age of Apocalypse. The Dark Beast, who also showed up in the backup story there, he originated in the Age of Apocalypse. And he's been utilized quite a bit over the years. And in fact, he was retconned to be kind of the reason for Mutant Massacre, as many of the Morlocks were retconned to be his failed genetic experiments that Sinister recognized as being a crude version of his own work, a crude imitation of his own work, and so he sent the Marauders to kill the Morlocks. But anyways, yeah. Okay, all right. Age of Apocalypse is possible, at least close to it's on par. It's in the same tier of X-Men stories. All right. We've got 2 more to go. So next up, Days of Future Past. Okay, all right. That's another one. And again, this is one that has had repercussions that have been long felt. In the initial sequel, we were introduced to the character Ahab, who's the bad guy in Extermination. And also, there's Rachel Summers, who is the son of Cyclops and Phoenix. So yeah, it's a big deal. Even for 2 issues, it was a big deal, and this is another one where an argument can easily be made that it's at least on par. So yeah, just like Age of Apocalypse, in the same tier. And you know what? The next one, God Loves Man Kills, also same tier. This God Loves Man Kills was the best way to describe this is it was kind of the basis for X-Men 2, though changes were made. Stryker was changed from being a reverend to being a covert operative for the military, but this really kind of drives home, it introduced a villain who is still villaining to this day, though some of his methodology has changed. Reverend William Stryker, who's now worshiping Satan, but hey, that, things change. As I recall, there's also I can't remember, but yeah, basically you've got Stryker as a televangelist who is convinced that mutants are the creation of the devil, and so he's created the Church of Humanity. They have their own militant arm, the Purifiers, who have shown up in other stories. It's a major story, and like I said, it is also on the same tier. This is definitely a story that it ranks. It ranks highly alongside Dark Phoenix and Days of Future Past and Age of Apocalypse. Maybe I could maybe see the entire Messiah story arc, including Messiah War, put up there as well. But yeah, so yeah, I still gotta say, this guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, and or he does and just wants to seem edgy. In fact, that's probably more than likely the case. Dude wants to show how edgy and cool he is by saying, oh yes, I'm going to say that this thing that everyone's been saying is great for so long. Yeah, it's good, but these are better. I mean, seriously, the Phalanx Covenant, X-Men versus techno-organic aliens, and it's a very standard story. Fatal Attractions. Every major plot point from that has been undone. I mean, oh yeah, well, okay. Exodus is back to being Magneto's right-hand man. So yeah, we still got that plot point, but it was undone and now it's been redone. But Avalon was destroyed. Wolverine has since gotten his adamantium back. Wolverine has since rejoined the X-Men. Well, okay, not since he came back from being actually dead, but later. Colossus has rejoined the X-Men. His sister is back from the dead. Hell, Magneto was an X-Man for a good long while. Excalibur no longer exists. So yeah, I mean, that's another thing about a lot of those. A lot of plot points have been undone. But anyway, that's all. That's it for today. Tomorrow we got another video coming up. And then after that, we'll be doing the normally weekly comic book video roundup. Though this time we'll be covering both last week's books and this week's books, so it's going to be longer than normal. Because I got to clear out the SD card. So anyway, that's it for today. As always, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Links to my Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon in the description box down below. Hit that notification bell to be notified when I put up new content. And as always, Rock Fox signing off saying, live long and rock hard.